Well, hello and welcome to episode 2 of Surrey Heath Cast with me, Jackie Hames.
And me, Al Pinkerton.
Well, Al, we made it through past episode 1, the pilot, to episode 2. And actually, I don't know about you, but I've been getting some pretty good feedback. Lots of people quite like the idea, maybe a bit long. Maybe we'll go for half an hour this time instead of 40 minutes. What have you been hearing?
I've heard keep it to half an hour. Keep it nice, nice and brief, so that it's just long enough to listen to on the commute to work. But I think people were really appreciative of the content, the things that we were talking about. They appreciated that little foregrounding of the budget, because of course we recorded it on the Wednesday, didn't we, before Jeremy Hunt's first budget. So yeah, I think really positive.
And it's such a shame.
Keep giving us feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Please keep giving us feedback. And with the sort of erosion of local news outlets, thank goodness we've still got a couple of local radio stations nearby. There's still the amount of local news and information about politics is quite limited. So please, if there's any particular issues you'd like to know about, please let us know. And Al, you mentioned about the fact that we discussed the upcoming autumn budget. Was there anything in it that you alluded to before, or you noticed that would be particularly pertinent to our newscast or Surrey Heath cast viewers?
It's certainly some of the things that I was kind of looking ahead to turned out to be true. So more people are going to be undoubtedly brought into the tax system, not because tax rates are necessarily changing, but because they're not changing with inflation. So there's that fiscal drag effect. So more people will be brought into tax. And then the other big thing that I anticipated was that the government would allow local authorities to increase council tax above the level that they're currently allowed to increase council tax on a yearly basis. So that's undoubtedly going to happen. And I think local authorities are going to now be allowed to increase council tax by about 5% per year, which, given the size of our council tax bills, that's a really significant sum of money. So that's the way that the government have been allowed to increase taxation, but without kind of taking the hit themselves reputationally, because they blame local councils. And of course,
you'd have to have a vote, wouldn't you, on how much if it was above 2.9%, you'd have to have a vote from the public to say whether or not they're happy with that.
That's right. So it used to be 2.99% or above. There had to be a local referendum. That's now 5% and above with a referendum. But you can increase up to 5% without a referendum. So that's a really significant increase, 5% year on year, and guaranteed all local authorities are going to go for the maximum 5% without referendum because they're struggling so much. Yeah, I just saw Surrey County Council have got a £15 million overspend this year. So they are going to be increasing by 5% when our council tax gets renewed. And maybe they might even go for a referendum themselves because they're clearly not able to balance the books.
Well, it's certainly something we're going to keep an eye on. If we hear anything or if you have any questions, please let us know and we'll try and find out if we don't know already. But Al, I saw you posted a beautiful photograph on Facebook yesterday from the Royal Geographic Society, somewhere I've always wanted to go. What were you doing up there?
Oh, well, that was very well spotted of you, Jackie. So I was in London yesterday. I was doing my day job yesterday. So as many listeners will know, politics is a sideline. I do it in my spare time. My day job is a geographer. I'm a reader, an associate professor of geopolitics at Royal Holloway University, and I was in town yesterday talking to several hundred A-level students about superpower geopolitics and the rise of China and the way that power seems to be shifting in the world away from big powers through to new rising powers, but also increasingly to private corporations. We talked about Facebook being an undue influence in the world, and other kinds of organizations and corporations who seem to be becoming more and more powerful. And really just thinking through with the next generation, what is the world going to look like for them when they get to 30 or 40? The old certainties about the structure of the world seem to be collapsing fast, and so really preparing them for a much more uncertain future than the one that we've had.
Yeah, and who'd have thought we'd have seen the demonstrations that we've seen recently in China against, obviously the COVID lockdowns, but also Iran and the huge sense of outrage after that woman was killed for not wearing the hijab, and it feels,
Absolutely.
even the big powers like China and America, this foundations aren't as stable as they used to be.
Not at all. I mean, look at the way that the United States, which emerged as the single superpower in the world after the end of the Cold War. I mean, look at it now, a country riven with division and uncertainty about the direction it should take. Is it a protectionist America first, highly nationalist country, or is it a much more open, outward-looking and kind of global policeman role that it's played in the past? And as you say, China. I mean, who would have thought that we'd see public demonstrations on the streets of China, raising really fundamental questions actually about China's strategy, which has been to build this huge presence in the world, to line up countries around the world to supply economically, but it's failed to look after and adequately care for its own civilian population through the pandemic. And the public are now speaking on the streets and may very well find themselves violently oppressed and suppressed as a consequence.
Yeah, it's a kind of bringing people out of the woodwork who perhaps felt, disengaged and disenfranchised, and are using this as an excuse to sort of make some demonstrations. And of course, it's damaged their own economy hugely, hasn't it? Locking down people for 2 years.
And here's the really interesting thing. It hasn't just, of course, damaged the Chinese economy, which it has. It hasn't just affected people's mental health, which it has. It hasn't just damaged faith in the Communist Party, which it has. It's also reshaping and reconfiguring and forcing us in this country and in the United States and in all consumer societies to think about how embedded China is in our global economy, because they haven't been producing the semiconductors in the volumes that they have. They haven't been producing their manufactured outputs in the way that they have. And we can see the effect of that in prices and on the availability of things on our shelves, which are just not as abundant as they are. Has anyone tried to buy a new car recently with the chip shortage, which is a direct consequence of all of the lockdowns and China's loss of production?
And coming off the back, obviously, of Russia and our dependency on them for power, it feels like there's an instability all over the world at the moment. So it's just a little bit scary. But coming back closer to home, there was a news story. I know that we were both impacted, and I'm sure many of you and our viewers and listeners can't have been, couldn't have avoided the appalling story of the death of 2-year-old Awab Ashak. I'm so sorry, Awab Ashak, and the revelations came about his death in 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by mold in his home. And it brought to national attention, didn't it, as so often a tragedy does, a crisis in our social housing in the UK. I mean, I was absolutely shocked to think that in 21st century Britain this could happen. It feels like something from a Charles Dickens novel, doesn't it?
Well, it does. It does look like it's of another time and another era. And so often we try and persuade ourselves that, we've had a century and a half of progress since novels like that were being written. But then when you see the pictures, and I haven't just seen the pictures, I've been invited into people's flats, which I have to say weren't quite in such a bad state as the pictures of Awab's flat in Rochdale. But I've seen damp, I've seen mold, and I know that people are living in incredibly difficult and challenging and unhealthy and sometimes unsanitary conditions. And this has prompted one of these moments of moral outrage in the UK that sometimes happens when something really strikes a chord. People deserve to live in dignity and health and in healthy conditions in the UK. We are still, despite the fact that we seem to be falling down the global league tables, we are still the world's 6th richest society when you measure our GDP. I guess one of the problems is that too much of that wealth is not equally distributed, and we live in a very unequal society, and the consequences of that sometimes are that people can be poor, people can be homeless, people are struggling to feed themselves, and people are unable to live in the kind of conditions that they deserve to live in one of the world's most advanced societies. And yeah, I mean, if you've been listening to the radio or watching the television over the past week, you will have been struck by the kind of images of that particular apartment in Rochdale and other very challenging conditions that people are living in today.
It's very easy from our sort of leafy Surrey. Sorry, have you got someone breaking in?
No, my wife is making tea in the background.
But it's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's so easy when we live in as we are so lucky to do, live in a beautiful county, which, leafy Surrey, it feels like we're a long way away from places like Rochdale and these sort of issues. But actually, you know what? There is, places like that just very locally to us as well.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that the housing crisis is manifold and kind of multi-dimensional. So there's the issue of maintenance, which is, of course, is very often devolved to housing associations, which hasn't been done. There's issue of poor building quality in the first place. So there are structural faults in buildings. And of course, we also know that the Grenfell Tower situation also exposed some real inadequacies in the materials that were being used in buildings as well. And we have each of those things represented here in Surrey Heath. So if any of you, and please do forgive the background noise, we do have builders in. So my wife is making tea for the joiners who are currently redoing our bathroom. So we have North Court in central Camberley. Sorry, Jackie, what was that?
You're up against. No, I was just saying you're up against it today, but just keep going.
Yeah, a bit up against it. But this is life, isn't it? This is the rich tapestry of life. North Court, which many people will know as the apartment block that's attached to the Atrium Centre in central Camberley, for example, we know that is affected directly by the cladding scandal. And the residents there have been up in arms. Some people might have seen their public Facebook posts about this, but that building has got cladding and non-cladding related issues attached to it. So again, exposed because of the Grenfell crisis, all kinds of fire inadequacies. And that building has got certification on it that means that people are really struggling to sell those apartments right now, and they have been for several years. So that's a really classic example of an element of the housing crisis that is striking right here in the middle of Surrey Heath. But equally, there are flats that are maintained by housing associations that are falling way short of standard. People are waiting months and months and months to have damp and mold repaired. People have water coming in through their roofs because roofs haven't been maintained. And I came across this extraordinary kind of admission, actually, on the Surrey Heath Borough Council website when I was looking at it today. People will probably know that Surrey Heath has no council housing at all. All the council housing in Surrey Heath was sold off in the 2000s, and that happened to many local authorities. Were you aware of that, Jackie?
It started really, I suppose, in the the Margaret Thatcher revolution almost, in selling off houses to, and in some ways, wasn't that an amazing opportunity for people to get a step on the housing ladder and to really feel that they could progress in life by owning their own homes? But the problem is, obviously, they just didn't build anything to replace the ones they were selling off.
And nor were they allowed to. I think that's the extraordinary thing about Right to Buy. Of course, you can see the benefits of being able to buy your council house and therefore have that sense of ownership. The Conservative Party were very keen on that because they thought that everybody who bought their council house would automatically then become the kind of conservative voters of the future. But they banned local authorities from using the income of the sale of council houses from building more council houses, from reinvesting it in the next generation. And that ultimately is where the problem has that there has been no replenishment of that stock. So it has dwindled and dwindled and dwindled over time, while house prices have increased. And therefore, the generation of people who bought houses at 20 aren't now able to think about buying a house until 30 or even 40. And so my children, who are currently 9 and 12, according to all of the statistics, are unlikely to be able to afford to buy their first house until they're in their 40s. And as much as I love my children, Jackie, I don't want to continue serving them cornflakes in the morning until they're 40. But that is a direct consequence, not of Right to Buy necessarily, but of the way that Right to Buy was done, and the fact that local authorities were banned from reinvesting in housing stock. And in a way, it's got even worse, because Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, said that he was going to have a new round of Right to Buy, where people had the right to buy from housing associations, which is maybe an appealing idea, but it's only an appealing idea if there is that cycle of reinvestment to produce genuinely affordable houses. Because this next generation of potential future homeowners are not going to be homeowners until, on average, late 30s or 40s.
And I've got two children in their 20s. Luckily, one's at university, and they're probably the safest place for him at the moment. But I've got a daughter, in 26, is renting, paying, a huge amount of rent, which actually, when I was growing up, would have been equal to a mortgage. But the idea of buying her own place is never going to happen. It's in her foreseeable future, that's for sure. And so it's going to affect all of us and our children, our grandchildren, for a good generation to come, isn't it? So frustrating for everybody, and as you say, the impact on people who have got their homes is that they're going to have one or sometimes even two generations still living with them for some time to come, if they can't afford to even rent. And of course,
absolutely,
the housing associations, people who live in those places, and in North Court, they're trying to get their step onto the housing ladder. They're the ones who can least afford, extra money for cladding and improvements, because they haven't got the money to buy their own place in the first place.
And that's exactly what the people of North Court have told me when I've been to visit them. They're in shared ownership arrangements with a particular housing association. It's called Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing Association. So they first of all, that's a pretty precarious position to be in. It's not necessarily a great position, but it's how they got onto the housing market, and now they find themselves with this bill potentially hanging over their heads to have these issues that they were never responsible for repaired. It was the original builder of the building who didn't build it satisfactorily and with all of the different requirements, fire safety requirements that it needed to have. So they're living with the consequences, and many families in there can't currently sell their flat because there's this certification on the building. People who maybe bought a one-bedroom flat when they were an unmarried couple, now they've got two kids and they still can't move. So you've also got people living in really unsafe conditions in there. But yet the extraordinary revelation on the Surrey Heath Borough Council website is that there are no council houses in Surrey Heath, and the demand for housing association homes is always greater than the number of homes available. We have a national housing crisis in this country, but we also have a local housing crisis here in Surrey Heath. A lack of availability, homes that are damp and are not in good order. And we have the cladding scandal, or at least the fire safety scandal, playing out in Surrey Heath as well. Because actually North Court doesn't have the cladding, but it has non-cladding fire safety issues associated with it.
It'll be interesting to see, won't it? What happens is, obviously the Grenfell inquiry is just recently finished, and their report is due next year, I believe. So it'd be interesting to see the recommendations that come out of that and the impact on housing and the building of houses. And of course, all of that is in the lap of our local MP Michael Gove as Minister for Housing and Levelling Up. And I know there's been a recent vote on that, and I know you've been paying attention to that, and probably more than I have, as to what that's about.
Well, certainly Michael Gove is housing communities and local government, and he's been in that role, of course, slightly on and off, but he's been in that role for 12 of the last 15 months. So this is the man who should be taking this seriously. And certainly judging by his visit up to Rochdale last week or the week before that, I think he is taking it seriously. But major questions that the government have to answer, such as why have they not done anything about this since they took power? Why, for example, did they vote against an amendment in 2016 to force all landlords to make their properties fit for human habitation? You know, I don't care who the amendment came from. I don't care who tabled it, but why would anybody vote against that? I don't understand it. Well, it is. I mean, it may be, some people might argue it's some kind of quirk of our parliamentary system, but you just don't vote against things like that, in my opinion. That was the right thing to vote for then, and people have got questions to answer about that. But certainly, I hope when the Grenfell Inquiry does finally report that some of these issues are properly addressed, and most importantly, it cannot be right that innocent purchasers of apartments are forced to pay for the reparation work to bring their buildings up to code when builders themselves have pocketed huge profits over recent times, and they can't be allowed to get away with this scot-free. It needs to be that the builders or developers pay for this work to be done, and it doesn't fall on particularly housing association shared owners who haven't done anything wrong and who are already being penalised adversely.
And to get their first home, and of course, with the cost of living crisis that we've been talking about, this could well end up with homelessness being a big but the idea that some of these people may be tipped over the edge into not having a home if they haven't got parents like us to deliver them cornflakes in the morning.
Well, that's right. I mean, there is new legislation on the books, and actually the webpage I was telling you about from Surrey Heath Borough Council is about the new Homelessness Reduction Act. So local authorities do now have a legal obligation to assist families as much as possible in effectively not tipping into homelessness. But of course, if you don't have a council housing stock, if your housing association stock is already oversubscribed, I think there are fundamental questions about really what does this Homelessness Reduction Act actually allow local councils or enable local councils to deliver. It strikes me all as being very toothless. You know, there's talk here about we can help with personal housing plans, for example, but I'm not quite sure a personal housing plan is really going to cut much teeth if there's a lack of housing. I think one of the things that local councils will try and do is, on your behalf, perhaps talk to private landlords to try and ensure that you can stay in your own home. But that's the only option around here, because there is no housing association supply readily available. There is no council housing. So in Surrey Heath, it's about trying to keep people in their privately rented or privately owned accommodation as much as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you know anyone, or if you're in that position yourself where you think you're going to start having a problem and it's heading down that road, please get in touch with Citizens Advice and the local council as early as you can, so you can start those conversations before the situation becomes critical. God forbid.
And we'll put the links to those organisations in the show notes here, and you can also call Surrey Heath Borough Council on 01276 707 100. But we'll put that number in the show notes as well.
Sure. And isn't it sad that it's too often the death of someone like 2-year-old to wake up everybody, and hopefully that Michael Gove and our national news broadcasters keep on this and don't let it just, turn to something that's once again brushed onto the carpet once that initial furor has died down, because it's just too important. And having a safe home is absolutely vital to everyone, isn't it? And somewhere you feel safe, that's your own, that you can, shut the front door and feel that you have your own space.
I think that's right. And I hope, as you say, I hope that doesn't get swept under the carpet. I hope it isn't one of these flash in the pan moments that we're all forgetting about in a few weeks to come. And the truth is, I don't think it will. I think people do care about housing, and not just for them. I recognise that Surrey Heath has got a particular socioeconomic profile, but even people who are living in their own privately owned homes that maybe have accrued hugely in value over recent times, they will have children and they will have grandchildren that we need to think about. And I think I would just say that, when we're casting votes in future elections, it's not, I don't think it should just be about voting for yourself. It should be also about voting for those who can't yet vote. It's about voting for the next generation, and making sure that we're actually creating a society that we want for that generation, that is going to work for them, because we are bequeathing a hell of an awful situation for our children in terms of climate, economy, housing. We just don't seem to have put the long-term measures in place in this country to enable the next generation to benefit from the same advantages that we've benefited from, and certainly my parents' generation benefited from. That baby boom generation they had such an advantageous rising economy, housing market, and what are we leaving to their grandchildren? It's a situation that is so much worse. And are their dreams, hopes, and aspirations going to be fulfilled by this country? And we need to ensure that they are.
His accident of birth in terms of when you were born, really, isn't it? It's like this COVID generation, and the damage to their education, which you would have seen firsthand with new students coming in, and I've seen in my private practice around mental health. There's enough pressure on our young people as it is, without the idea that you're never going to be able to own your own home, and being able to support a family is really worrying. But certainly we're going to keep an eye on it, aren't we? And I know you're going to raise any issues that you see. We're
going to keep a very close eye on it. And Jackie, I am aware of the time, and I'm conscious of our listener feedback that we need to try and wrap up by half an hour. So let me take the con for a second and ask. So what are you going to be up to in the coming week? Have you got any exciting plans?
Well, actually, funny you should say that, Al. It was almost as if we planned it. No, actually,
tell me more.
One of my little sidelines is campaigning around press reform. So to get our national newspapers to sort of comply with their own regulations a bit more. And I'm involved with a group called Hacked Off, and every year we have an annual lecture from somebody who with an interest in this area, and how its impact on democracy, as well as misinformation. And we've got our annual Leveson lecture on Tuesday, and I'll be chairing the panel discussion afterwards. This year we've got Chris Bryant MP, Labour MP, delivering. This is to be the 9th one, and we've had some interesting people in the past, like James O'Brien, Joe Brand has done one. We've had a real broad range of people, and his is entitled The Truth Algorithm. So I think it's looking at how the truth and factual information gets skewed by computer algorithms, and how that impacts the nature of the information we get delivered on our devices, or actually in our newspapers as well, because so much news and factual information is driven by computers, as opposed to being checked by real people for accuracy. So that'll be really interesting.
Fantastic. Really
we've got our raging matinee idol out to come and introduce the thing. And it really, truth, honesty, and integrity in public life is really important. And I hope that, unfortunately, it's sold out. But if anybody wants to tune in, there will be it going live on YouTube, and also you can watch it afterwards, a recorded version. But again, we'll put the link on our Facebook page.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. I hope that goes really well. And Chris Bryant is I'm sure, a wonderful speaker. And I know that you've been doing great work supporting the victims of the hacking scandal over many years as part of the Hacked Off campaign. Just another one of the many strings to your already very well strung bow, Jackie.
Yes. You can tell by the state of my little den here how chaotic and but yes, but it is really important, and if anybody's interested, you can go to hackinginquiry.org, our website, and there's films on there like the impacting victims of intrusion into grief and things like that, so please do visit that. That's my plug. But it's been really lovely to chat with you again, Al, and to talk to everyone in Surrey Heath about such an important issue, I think, around housing this week. And hopefully, please do give us feedback on the email address that we'll be putting out.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't talk about religion, politics, or housing quite enough. So I think we've slightly redressed that imbalance today. And before the joiners finally knock this wall down behind me, I think I better sign off, because I can hear, I know that some of those noises will have been coming through the microphone. But Jackie, lovely to see you. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning, and we'll see you next time on Surrey Heathcast.
Fantastic. Nice to see you. Take care. Good luck with the work. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.